Whiteridge. Jason Whiteridge woke to the sound of stones sliding. Not a creak or groan like an old door, but a deliberate, glacial rearrangement. Like Magetown itself was playing a game of its own invention. Somewhere beyond the thin shutters, a tower was trading places with a butcher's stall. The bell of the archive district would ring 4 times to signify the rotation. Jason had already learned to tell time by the shifting geometry. He sat up, careful not to disturb the paper maze he'd arranged across his desk. Blue ink tracked the last 12 hours of the city's transformation. Yellow pins marked stable anchor points, rare as they were. Only yellow mages could navigate Magetown without risk. Jason had no such talent, only obsession. Obsession and a good network. He dressed quickly, dark coat, clean shirt, the gauntlet-shaped brooch of polished silver on his lapel. The symbol meant little to outsiders, but to those who mattered, it marked him as the agent of the Silver Gauntlet. A tavern franchise in name, an intelligence ring in practice. 47 establishments across Yyth, each with their own rooms, rumors, and runners. Only one rule: information in exchange for drink, coin, or silence. Jason fed the fire, brewed barkroot tea, and cracked the wax on the morning packet. The message inside was a scroll of 2 hands' width, written in tight cant. Breach near gatepost 12, portal opened, no yellow oversight, fabric not torn but grazed, witness claims, a shadow bled through. Message verified, need eyes, watch the west courtyard, something's loose. He read it twice. A reckless portal. Unguided. Jason stood and stared at the shifting line of city through the window's edge, letting his eyes unfocus. This wasn't just an incident. This was a pattern forming. He thumbed a note onto his own slate. Unauthorized gateways, 3 in 2 months. All west-facing. All reported faint pulse readings. Magetown wasn't meant to pulse. That was the fabric's way of warning it was thin. Too much portal magic, too fast, without the safeguards of yellow calibration. Jason had seen what happened to cities that pulsed too long. The breach of Kerin Hollow still echoed through whispers. But Kerin hadn't had Magetown's defenses. Or Jason. He tapped his brooch twice, and within minutes, a knock came from the outer door. A boy with red cheeks and ink-stained fingers entered with a bow. "Runner Wilk," the boy said. "Silver Gauntlet West Courtyard flagged last night. Woman in a shawl paid triple for no questions and left without drink. Stayed silent. Watched the gate. When it shimmered, she smiled." Jason didn't like that. "You got the face?" "Drawn and run. Sent to North Gauntlet to match. No hits yet." Jason tossed him a silver thorn. "Buy clean gloves. You're smudging your leads." The boy grinned and ran. Jason packed his field book, 3 folded maps, and the device he called the spinner. A 5-armed gyroscope that clicked in tune with the city's movements. It wasn't perfect, but it beat guessing. The algorithm inside was based on years of Jason's own notes, records of the city, its patterns, recurrence intervals, shifts keyed to lunar drift and mage pressure. He pulled his hood and walked out into Magetown. The buildings around him creaked like books rearranging themselves on shelves only they could see. He passed a dry fountain now housing a cheese cellar, and a guard post mounted atop a moving awning. The yellow tile line beneath his boots glowed faintly. It wasn't for civilians, but Jason traced it anyway, hoping its faint hum would warn him of another reorientation. As he reached the west courtyard, he saw it. The shimmer. Not a full breach. Not yet. A graze. A place where reality got brushed the wrong way. He stepped closer, and the air smelled of heatless fire and foreign ash. The stones around it trembled, just slightly. Then, movement. From the shimmer stepped a single drop of shadow, no larger than a leaf. It hit the stone and did not bounce. Instead, it flattened, stretched, and wormed its way into a crack in the paving. Jason felt his blood chill. He didn't know what it was, but it wasn't from here, and something had let it in. Chapter 2: The Long Game. Jason Whiteridge was patient. He had not always been. As a boy, he once threw a compass across the harbor when a courier ship was late. He remembered his father's silence, more damning than any scolding. The man had simply turned away, eyes heavy with centuries, and said, "If you wait long enough, son, the wind turns every tide." His father had outlived 3 wars and 5 wives. He was not ageless, he aged. But like parchment sealed from decay, he yellowed slowly, never brittle. They called it the gift of the enduring, but Jason had lived close enough to call it what it was, a slow-burning curse. It demanded detachment, and detachment required distance. Jason had learned to wait. Wait for the right whisper. Wait for a move worth countering. Wait until a rumor rotted or fermented. That morning, he did not chase the shadow that sank into the paving stone. Instead, he noted the mark, placed a trace bead nearby, and walked away. The silver gauntlet did not act fast. It acted well. Magetown was a chaos of moving walls and shifting halls, but its people were more predictable, especially those Jason trained. Each operative had a title, a function, and a place in the weave. The spy trained in shadow movement and silence, used for clean gathering. Not the best in conversation, but excellent in observation. They worked inside halls, along ledges, beneath courts. Their knives were rarely drawn, but always kept sharp. The diplomat dressed better than a king, and smelled of imported soap. These were the deal-makers, greasing council halls and rubbing shoulders with mage guilds. They never lied outright, just rearranged the truth. Useful in cities where the gauntlet needed legitimacy. The rumor collector, not quite spies, not quite liars. They listened in places no one noticed. Children's games, tavern corners, brothel kitchens. They mapped gossip like topography, and learned which whispers climbed mountains and which died in valleys. The confidence man actors and liars, beautiful ones. They seduced for secrets, or sold snake oil charms with mage seals forged in sweat. They were dangerous, because they liked the work too much. Still, when a church vault needed opening, or a governor needed swaying, it was the conman who went in with a smile. The forger, every kingdom was built on paper. Decrees, visas, rites of passage. The forger rewrote history for a price, sealed in perfect script. Jason kept one forger, locked in a moving room beneath the East Gauntlet. She hadn't seen daylight in 9 years. Her work was flawless. The Watcher, Jason's favorites. Quiet, unnoticed. Stationary. Their job was to see, not interfere. Watchers reported on patterns, when a street vendor changed routes, when a guard forgot to salute, when a pigeon stopped returning to a rooftop. They noticed decay. They noticed rise. And more than anything, they noticed change. The brute every net needs a weight. Brutes were the weights. Loyal, mean, and not afraid of blood. Jason rarely used them, but when he did, they left marks, literal ones. The gauntlet didn't like violence, but sometimes a door wouldn't open unless kicked. Jason's strength wasn't that he mastered all these roles. His strength was that he knew when to release each one, as if plucking a string on a harp made of teeth. The west shimmer, the shadow in the stone, was not a brute problem. It was a watcher's problem, one already in place. And it was a rumor collector's gift, if they could track the woman in the shawl. But it was, more importantly, a timing problem. Magetown was far from the Crimson Pentacle's eye for a reason. The red-cloaked enforcers of the world's arcane law didn't tolerate unsanctioned spellcraft, and even less so when it involved interplanar gateways. Jason had helped plant Magetown like a weed beyond the Pentacle's grasp. The city's chaos wasn't a flaw. It was the only thing that made it invisible. So if something was slipping through the veil now, creeping in by mistake or by design, Jason couldn't sound alarms. Couldn't warn the wrong ears. Not yet. He'd learned from his father. Sometimes you wait. Sometimes you watch. And sometimes you walk straight into danger and pretend you meant to all along. Jason returned home, sat at his desk, and drew a new pin in red. Pattern forming. Shadow breach. Woman in shawl. West-facing portals. Then, at the bottom, One last note. Don't chase ghosts. Set the table. Let them come. Chapter 3. The Cost of White. Jason Whiteridge found the red gem in a bowl of bruised apples. It winked at him from beneath a rot spot like a bloodshot eye. Impossible to miss if you were looking, easy to ignore if you weren't. Jason wasn't looking, not for a gem, but his hands were trained to feel for things. And this thing wasn't food. It was smooth, faceted in a lazy spiral cut, and warm to the touch despite the morning chill. He wiped it clean with his sleeve. It glowed faintly, just enough to be seen, not enough to be understood. A red, no doubt, rare, but not precious, magically shaped, not born from the earth. Like Magetown itself, crafted, placed, spun into order from 100 threads. He held it up and turned it in the rising light. Red-robed mages, known for their sacred pyres and strange brews, were the alchemists, the faith-binders, the quiet mystics. They ran the temples and the tincture dens, served as morticians, healers, fire wardens, plague callers, and sometimes exorcists. They didn't ask questions, but they always knew things before you said them. Jason pocketed the gem and glanced at the apple vendor, who shrugged. Found 3 this week. They fall out of walls sometimes. That was Magetown logic. Things fell out of walls. Jason paid for the apples, took the gem, and continued toward the artisan bend of the district where his errands waited. The forger's lane was narrow today, pressed between a shifting archway and a tower that rotated in half measures every quarter hour. He ducked into Vorin's scripts and sundries, a dusty den packed with inkpots, blank, vellum, burnt corner deeds, and counterfeit merchant seals, ready for buyer imprinting. Vorin was asleep behind the counter, ink-stained and breathing like a bellows. Jason dropped 2 yellow gems in the slot box and helped himself, thick parchment, a flexible stem drafting quill, wax beads, in red and blue, and 2 official Western Range land deed blanks, each with the faded sigil of a long-dead territorial prince. He also took 3 drops of vinegar to rub out old signatures. No need to leave ghosts behind. Jason's newest client needed proof of a mine claim in the untamed western wilds, where no mage dared plot a permanent road. But what Jason was building wasn't just a false deed. It was a structure of lies built to endure wind, scrutiny, and time. Like everything else in Magetown. On the way out, he paused at the street edge and examined a mason's marker stone, recently carved and fresh with copper chalk. The man who'd left it was new, probably local, and likely cheap. Jason tapped the stone with his knuckle and murmured, "I'll need you soon." Because he wasn't just forging paperwork, he was laying foundation. A new Silver Gauntlet tavern. In the rough. Western edge. One that wouldn't shift when Magetown did. One that would catch the loose. Intelligence that ran like river water through that end of the realm. But he needed a mason he could trust. One not already bought by her. Jilly Schweister. The red-cap queen of Grit Road hospitality, a bard by voice, a showman by instinct, and a damned menace in the world of intelligence. Her red-cap inns dotted the continent like blood splatter, gaudy, loud, warm, welcoming, and infected with ears. Her servers smiled too wide, her stage bards watched too closely, and her prices were always just a hair under market, which meant she was subsidized by someone with deep pockets, or dangerous friends. Jason's client didn't just want a tavern built. He wanted a foothold in Jilly's shadow. He wanted access. He wanted leverage. And Jason, he wanted to win. Back in his corner room, Jason lit a taper and turned the red gems slowly over his ledger. Blue for commerce. Yellow for movement. Red for transformation. White for what? Memory? Control? Authority? Something bigger? No one quite knew. Not even the whites, or at least, not the ones who ever answered questions. And yet, the race for white gems had become Magetown's most discreet obsession. They were rarely seen in circulation, and when they were, they moved like relics, never traded, only passed. He would need one soon, not to spend, to understand. Because understanding was leverage. and Jason Whiteridge never wasted leverage. Chapter 4. Quiet pieces on a wild board. The northern keep rose like a broken tooth on the edge of civilization, its battlements peaking over windswept hills and its wards older than the prince who last signed its deed. The mage who lived there, Halvarin of the Ninth Thread, fancied himself a scholar of portal harmonics, safeguards, oscillation control, recursive gateways. Good work, brilliant mind, pitiable soul. Jason had, over the last 9 months, convinced him, carefully, gradually, falsely, that Magetown's academic council was considering funding his research. A scholarship, they called it. A program for Western integration and magical stabilization. A fabricated committee, chaired by fabricated names. Every meeting reported by a confidence man in disguise. Every vote counted by a clerk who didn't exist. Halvarin had signed away voting proxies. He'd provided 3 sets of proprietary notes. And this week, he'd unknowingly approved the construction of a diplomatic field house just outside the keep's eastern fence. Jason had already chosen the tavern's name, the Distant Sigh. He liked the poetry. He liked the control even more. That evening, Jason unrolled a map in his quarters, its edges pinned down with bits of colored stone. Not the gem-cut kind. Just pebbles from each zone. He stared at it and poured himself 1 finger of spice wine. The real planning was always done in quiet. Magetown was chaos. But the world beyond it was geometry. To the west, the Fairy-La forest loomed with the slow, cruel logic of the Fae. Queen Zazaniel ruled there, a name sung in lullabies and cursed in tongues. Her territory was a paradox, impenetrable yet tempting. No one passed westward without her leave. Not soldiers, not scholars, not spies. But Jason didn't need passage. He needed stories. A single tale of favor or disgrace from the Fairy-La court was worth a dozen truths elsewhere. Fairy gossip had power, chaotic, symbolic, and wildly useful. He would send in a rumor collector with a musician's smile and an offer of tribute. Zazaniel could not be bought, but she could be amused. To the southwest, nestled in cliff shadow and ash-soaked hills, lay the Death Chapel. Norn territory. Closed to nearly all. It was said the Norn could read lifelines through bone and soil, that they knew not only the day one would die, but how. Jason didn't need their secrets. He just needed access. Or the illusion of it. A forged alliance. A hinted friendship. Even a staged sighting. The Norn were reclusive, yes, but their reputation wasn't. People feared what they didn't understand. Jason's job was to be seen shaking the hand of fear. It made him more valuable. It made others nervous. To the far west, there was Troll Haven. A reservation in name. A cage in truth. The trolls had been penned in after the Treaty of Hallow Reach. Brute strength. Stone-blooded. Long memory. Short temper. Jason had never been there. But he'd spoken to a troll once, in a jail cell, in Greenwall. The creature had recited a poem so sad that Jason hadn't slept for 2 nights. They weren't dumb. They weren't tame. They were waiting. If he could trade something meaningful to the trolls, information maybe, a path to public respect, he could earn a loyalty no one else wanted, or expected. And that, more than coin or blood or papers, was Jason's favorite kind of leverage, unseen until too late. He jotted notes on his ledger. Fairy-La, rumor collector, bard trained. Deploy with care. Bring honey wine, not iron. Death Chapel, commission forgery of shared border contract. Float rumor of Silver Gauntlet involvement. Troll Haven, identify troll contact. Research mythos. Send watcher, disguised as delivery driver. Halvarin's keep, maintain confidence scheme. Begin tavern foundation. Install listener, in pantry wall. He sat back. The map had not changed. But he had rearranged it all the same. Chapter 5. Notes on a Crumbling Crown. Jason Whiteridge preferred whispers to war horns. But he knew a muster list when he saw one. And he had 3 in front of him, each written in a different hand, each bearing the fading seal of Lord Yyth, the roadkeeper, the tollmaster, the hidden sword in a nobleman's scabbard. Yyth didn't wear a crown, but his men counted the silver before it reached King Colcor's court. The notes named the sons of steadholders, bark-backed farmlords and northern marshmen, all being summoned quietly to outposts not yet called forts. Riders disguised as tacksmen delivered scrolls in sealed oilcloth. Yyth's banner hadn't flown in decades, but it was painted on the inside of those dispatch cases. Jason underlined 2 names, Barrack thrice kicked, a bastard-turned-hammer sergeant with a streak of loyalty. Flint of the hollow bow, a man with a limp and the memory of a trapdoor. These were not peacetime summons. These were early stones in a siege. King Colcor, kindly as he appeared, had not been a fool in his youth. His defenses were elegant, his alliances clever, and his enemies often invited to dinner before disappearing from history. But Jason had seen the man recently in his mind's eye. Thinner, slower. Speaking in half-thoughts and holding court with yesterday's memory. It would be soon. Jason scratched a margin note. Yyth waits for rot. He will move when the king can no longer raise a hand or a question. He wasn't alone in thinking so. The princes, if one could call them that, were no balm to the realm. Shardel was a tactician of sharp edges. No humor. No warmth. He wore ceremonial black too often, and smiled only at maps. Yyth, by contrast, performed joy, broad smiles, golden rings, and flowing red sleeves. But Jason had caught his signature on 3 too many land seizures marked expansion of royal grounds. Yyth courted the noble daughters in daylight and the merchant daughters by candlelight. Both were adopted, and worse, cousin-blooded. Not royal. Not true. The people didn't hate them. But they didn't trust them either. Not in the way they had trusted Colcor when his eyes were bright. Jason circled the margin again. No one fears invasion. They fear succession. But it wasn't all soft walls. Jason's notes on loyalists included 5 names worth attention. Sir Ardin the Cold Flame, sworn to protect the bloodline and the gates alike. One of the last to duel for oaths. Dame Melora of the Vault, a strategist who had once burned her own siege ladders to hold a bluff. The twin axe lords of Ferrowalk, who, despite family differences, had vowed to hold against any outside hand. Old Sparrow scribe Netchel, who knew every change in the laws, and could spot a false decree from a continent away. These champions had sworn, not to Yyth or Shardel, but to Colcor, and to the realm, so long as it resisted foreign hands. Jason made another note. If Shardel and Yyth seize power too quickly, loyalists may treat them as invaders. Which made the silver gauntlets roll. Valuable. Jason leaned back and looked out the Magetown window. Storms rise. Kingdoms fall. But those who hold the toll booths, they never lack for bread or secrets. He smiled and dipped his quill in the red wax again. Jason Whiteridge kept the ledger open before him, one finger brushing down the list of names, changes and titles as he leaned into the gentle sway of Magetown's shifting walls. Already the draft for the next chapter began taking shape in his mind. Sir John Fildham had replaced earlier mentions of myth and fire, less mystique, but far more plausible in court records. The Seven Brothers clan had taken the place of the more exotic-sounding twin axe lords of Ferrowalk. Jason found them easier to write into alliances, mountain barbarians motivated more by coin and drink than oath or honor. Old Sparrow scribe Netchel, whose name stirred too much familiarity among the library elders, had been rewritten as Damien Cloakfist, a far more useful identity for cloak and dagger movements. And finally, Flint of the Hollow Bow, a man too often remembered for his limp and a single trapdoor incident, was now filed away as Pilfer Thinfence, quartermaster in public, but in truth, the third major within Yyth's covert mustering. Jason sipped his inked tea and narrowed his eyes. Yyth's men had spread across the western roads, establishing tolls not just for coin but to tally the sons of every village. Musters had begun subtly, with road tariffs exchanged for volunteer lists. The principality of Yyth stood tense beneath the kindly shadow of King Kolkor, the white-bearded sovereign whose age betrayed him daily. No one wanted to say it aloud, but a coup or siege was inevitable. Jason had tracked oaths made by old champions, men and women bound by duty, not just to the realm, but to Kolkor himself. Shardel and Ikim, his adoptive heirs from a cousin's diluted bloodline, were regarded as strangers to the court. Outsiders, interlopers. Jason's quill scratched. Yyth would not move while the king yet breathed. But once that breath stilled, it would not be Shardel nor Ikim who lit the royal fires. It would be Yyth, and Jason Whiteridge would know it before the flames were lit. Chapter 6. The Loom of Yyth. Jason Whiteridge spread the map wide across his worn oak table, the shifting edges held down by rough stones from his travels, some from Frostshire, others from the Desert of Tears. The long inked lines marking roads, rivers, and forest borders seemed alive beneath his finger, a web straining for a fly. Lord Yyth was no idle threat. The quiet tolls along the western roads were the softest drumbeat of a coming storm. But Jason knew better. Yyth's ambition was a spider's nest, and every strand reached farther than most cared to see. Port and harbour town, east of Greenwall, where sea and river met in salt and fog, lay two key settlements. Port was the merchant's gateway, a bustling hub where goods and rumours mingled in equal measure. Control here meant control over imports, exports, and the flow of news. Harbour town, south of Greenwall, was smaller but vital, a naval support outpost and staging ground for river patrols. Jason's spies had reported increased patrols, tighter regulations, and new tolls levied under Yyth's name. Frostshire. Farther inland, Frostshire was a craftsman's bastion and a strategic jewel. The craftsmen here forged weapons and enchanted tools that travelled beyond principality borders, often traded in Magetown itself. Frostshire was home to the champions of Aesir and Vanir, bound by a peace accord and confined to the mountain fortress. Yyth's move to control Frostshire meant pressing against an ancient pact and risking war. Blue ivy and the mountains of futility south in the lowlands. Blue ivy sprawled, a patchwork of farms, river towns and merchant routes threading toward the mountains of futility, a jagged, forbidding range that cleaved the continent like a wound. These mountains divided the principality from the Steel City's northern reaches and beyond. The lowlands fed both cities and armies. Controlling Blue Ivy meant commanding the grain and the iron that fueled war. Thornwood Forest. North of Frostshire, Thornwood was a dense forest, home to the wild elves, fiercely independent and little understood. Their archers were said to strike like shadows at dusk. Their magic was old, tied to roots and stone. Yyth's forces dared not enter openly, but rumour told of secret pacts, bribes, and subtle manipulations. The Desert of Tears east. Beyond the fertile valleys, the Desert of Tears stretched, a cracked earth of sun and ash. An active volcano crowned the desert's heart, a constant reminder of nature's fury and latent destruction. The desert was sparsely populated by nomads and hermits, but it held strategic value, magical. Ley lines intersected here, some rumoured to link directly to Magetown's portals. The great river flowing relentlessly from frozen north to tropical south. The great river was the artery of the land, splitting east from west. Controlling its crossings meant controlling trade, troop movements, and communications. Yyth's men were securing bridges and fording points, anticipating future sieges or blockades. Jason's fingers traced a slow circle around the whole. Assimilate these, he thought, and Yyth's reach will choke the principality. No corner safe, no ally untouched. But Jason also saw opportunity. Each region was a thread in the tapestry, and every thread had its tension, its unravel point. The wild elves could be bargained with, or provoked. The desert's ley lines might be turned against the invader. The river crossings were a chokehold, and a temptation, he wrote in his ledger. Careful and measured. Port and harbour town. Economic pressure. Rumour seeding. Bribes to dockmasters. Frostshire. Whispered unrest among craftsmen. Subtle tests of champion loyalty. Blue ivy and mountains, disrupt supply lines, raise peasant unrest. Thornwood, seek envoys, gain wild elf scouts or saboteurs. Desert, investigate, leyline magic, prepare disruption. River, monitor crossings, plant false intelligence on troop movements. Yyth was a shadow growing darker every day. Jason's task was clear. Before Yyth could choke the land, he would choke Yyth's ambitions instead. Chapter 7. A Day in the Labyrinth. Jason Whiteridge rose with the quiet resolve of a man who knew time was not his enemy, only a partner requiring precision. He was not the sort to rise with the dawn, but neither did he waste daylight. His quarters in Magetown were not luxurious, though the rents for a private room with thick enough walls to muffle spell practice and argument came dear. Space was premium in a city that shifted, that reshaped its paths according to arcane rhythms decipherable only to yellow mages. Jason, being neither yellow-robed nor arcane, had learned to adapt by routine, anchoring his mind with daily acts of quiet order. He started with his desk. Always the desk. The inkpots were reordered, stacked by shade, standard black, midnight violet, alchemical rust. Scrolls were unrolled, re-rolled, stacked with ribbon tight enough to cut fingers. His chair faced east, always east toward Greenwall, just slightly off-center, a position he'd tested and preferred for thinking. Each morning's ritual was a prayer, in motionless form, not to gods, but to clarity. He paused with a hand on the edge of the workbench, and let his mind slip to Jilly Schweister, the peacock of the Redcap Inns. Showman, bard, dealer in drink, dealer in secrets. He knew her bright laughter was a mask for a blade too sharp for most to detect. Her harlequin garb drew eyes, her words misdirected ears. She'd built a rival network with charisma and chaos, a foil to Jason's more surgical approach. She made noise. He preferred silence. But she was no fool, and the two danced a quiet war. He leafed through ledgers and forgeries from the night before. A pair of land deeds for old roots near the southern basin, a falsified lineage claim for a Greenwall merchant's disinherited nephew. Nothing yet worthy of his best inks, but it was a start. There were more pressing matters. Today, he had to clean the floors himself. The cleaner had taken a knife in a tavern brawl and wouldn't be back for days. Jason moved with calm efficiency, clearing away scraps of failed cipher, bone, dry bread crusts, and the powdery residue of a failed sealant compound. The room took shape. It wasn't just dust he cleared. It was distraction. The mid-morning bell of iron and whinstone rang from the mage towers. Jason dressed in layered browns and a soft-trimmed jacket that could pass for merchant or minor alchemist depending on the tilt of a hat. He wore no sigil, no insignia. His badge of office was silence and adaptability. He descended into Magetown's outerwood curve. Today, the Silver Gauntlet Tavern wore the face of a curio shop, an enchantment to mislead new arrivals. The old regulars knew to knock 3 times with the knuckle of the index and not the whole fist. Inside, the barkeep changed hats every hour to signal message availability. Today, he wore a silver cap with a red tassel. That meant live rumors, fresh from the west. Jason posed as a merchant from the Cradle Basin region, leaning heavily into his accent and carrying an exaggerated limp. He moved through the crowd quietly, picking up fragments. A blood moon sighted above Thornwood. Fairies caught trading sleep-forget roots at the border of Fairy La. A drowned mage whose skin turned to glass. He made note of the third, likely false, but worth watching. In a side booth veiled by illusion shimmer, he met with Melda Ninecoin, the best forger in the Western trade. She handed him 2 scroll tubes and a list of materials she needed. Shredded silk, dried swamp ink, scrap from enchanted timbers. A fair price. He paid her in red and yellow gems, the former rarer now. Before parting, he asked, "Any word from Greenwall?" "Only that the wind tastes different there," she said. "Smells like clerics' robes and old incense." Jason smiled. Then our man's arrived. In Greenwall, he had begun sowing a seed, an agent posing as a cleric of Tyr, lawbringer and redeemer. That righteous fire would draw eyes and offer cover for subtler truths. Beneath the vestments, his operative was fluent in coercion and extraction. With local sympathy, the false cleric would become a force and an ear. By early afternoon, Jason returned to the western side of Magetown. The yellow mages avoided him, though not with disdain. Rather, they treated him as one might a clever animal in a laboratory, interesting, dangerous, not to be underestimated. He stopped at the Hall of Radiant Steps, where those few yellow robes with public duties gathered. A senior mage, robed in shimmering ochre folds, gave him audience. Jason made polite inquiry about the city's recent spatial shifts. The mage smiled with cracked teeth. Today we breathe westward. The streets follow us. Jason had long since stopped asking questions that wouldn't be answered. But he noted the pattern. 4 weeks now, the city had curved slightly west, bending toward the outer borderland. A portending of pressure. Or ambition. Evening came with iron taste and autumn chill. Jason returned to a secondary site, an abandoned dry dock turned training hall. Here, 3 young operatives practiced, one in voice, one in posture, one in shadow. They were being groomed, a confidence man, a rumor collector, and a brute. Jason watched, corrected, and in one case, offered a small strike to the jaw, not in cruelty, but as a lesson in tension. Lies must have spine. Truth alone won't hold you. By nightfall, he sat alone in a recessed alcove behind his workroom's false wall. There, a candle burned blue, and the papers before him bore only symbols. Ciphers in progress. Alliances drawn with ghost ink. He opened a drawer and removed a letter sealed but never sent. It bore Gilly Schweister's name. A warning? A proposal? Even Jason did not yet know.